The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the silence Janelle inhabited. It was 7 p.m. The skeletal remains of the workday, scattered across deserted desks, abandoned coffee cups, half-eaten sandwiches wrapped in crinkling cellophane, the ghostly glow of computer screens still displaying forgotten spreadsheets. Hawthorne and Bell Financial, a monolith of glass and steel piercing the Sacramento skyline, held its breath, waiting for the next wave of activity. But for now, it was just Janelle and the ghost of transactions past. She pushed her cleaning cart, the squeak of its wheels a rhythmic counterpoint to the humming lights, a sound she couldn't hear but felt as a vibration through the worn linoleum under her shoes. Tonight, her task was the executive wing, a realm of hushed opulence and hushed whispers she was usually only privy to after everyone else had left. The smell of expensive leather and subtle cologne still lingered in the air, a testament to the day's power plays and hushed negotiations. She liked it this way, the emptiness. It gave her a strange sense of ownership, a temporary dominion over a world she was usually excluded from. Janelle methodically worked her way through the spacious offices, her movements precise and economical. Each wipe of her cloth, each spray of disinfectant was a small act of defiance against the invisible barriers that separated her from the world of hearing. Being deaf in a world obsessed with sound was like watching a movie with the volume muted. You could see the action, understand the general flow, but the nuances, the emotional undercurrents, were often lost, leaving you with a nagging sense of incompleteness. Tonight, however, the silence was a comfort. It was her space, her sanctuary. She paused outside the CEO's office, the largest and most opulent of them all. The nameplate on the door gleamed under the fluorescent light. Brandon Teller. New CEO. She'd seen him only briefly in passing, a tall figure with a serious face and sharp eyes. He seemed different, less aloof than his predecessor. But then what did she know? She was just the cleaning lady. Invisible, unimportant. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she pushed open the heavy oak door. The office was dimly lit, the city lights painting a panoramic backdrop through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Brandon Teller stood at the window, his back to her, a dark silhouette against the shimmering cityscape. He seemed lost in thought, oblivious to her presence. Janelle hesitated, unsure whether to announce herself or retreat. Her instinct was always to retreat, to remain unseen, unheard. But something stopped her, a strange impulse, a flicker of defiance against her ingrained invisibility. She raised her hand, her fingers forming the familiar shape of "Good evening" in American Sign Language. It was a reflex, a habit. She didn't expect him to understand. Why would he? He was the CEO, a man accustomed to the spoken word, the language of power and influence. Brandon Teller turned, startled. His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of recognition, of understanding, crossed his face. Then, to her astonishment, his own hands, large and slightly clumsy, mirrored her gesture. "Thank you," he signed, the words slightly awkward but undeniably there. Janelle froze, a wave of emotion washing over her. Surprise, disbelief, a hesitant warmth blooming in her chest. He understood. He actually understood. It was a small thing, a simple gesture, yet resonated with a power that shook her to her core. In that silent exchange, something shifted within her. The invisible barrier that had always separated her, that had defined her existence, seemed to crack, to weaken. He saw her. He really saw her. Not just a shadow, a functionary, but a person. A person who communicated differently, yes, but a person nonetheless. The realization resonated deep within her, a quiet tremor of hope in the vast silence of her world. He hadn't looked away, hadn't dismissed her with an embarrassed cough or a condescending smile. He had met her gaze, had acknowledged her presence, had spoken her language. Her heart beat a little faster, a nervous flutter in her chest. This was new territory, uncharted waters. She'd spent her life navigating the world of hearing, adapting, compensating, becoming a master of observation, a student of body language. But this was different. This was connection, a fragile, tentative bridge spanning the chasm of silence. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken words. He cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound that broke the spell. He seemed unsure what to do next, his hands hovering awkwardly in the air. Janelle lowered her gaze, a familiar shyness creeping in. The moment of connection, so unexpected and intense, threatened to overwhelm her. She wanted to say something, to sign something, to acknowledge the shared language, the shared understanding, but the words wouldn't come. Fear, the old, familiar companion, tightened its grip, whispering doubts and insecurities in her ear. What if it was a mistake? What if he regretted his clumsy attempt at ASL? What if he thought she was presumptuous, foolish for daring to greet the CEO in her silent tongue? She busied herself with her cleaning cart, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her supplies. The familiar routine, the methodical movements, were a comfort, a shield against the vulnerability that threatened to expose her. She could feel his gaze on her, questioning, curious. It was a different kind of gaze than she was used to. Not dismissive, not condescending, but intrigued. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. He spoke then, his voice low and hesitant. "I'm learning," he said, the word a little rushed, a little awkward. "Azl, I'm learning." Janelle looked up, her eyes meeting his. He was watching her intently, his expression open, vulnerable. And in that moment, something within her shifted. The fear receded, replaced by a tentative hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The rhythmic thump of her worn work boots against the pavement was a familiar comfort, a steady beat against the rising anxiety that tightened her chest. Janelle's breath puffed out in small white clouds against the crisp morning air. The city, usually a muted hum in her world, felt strangely amplified this morning. The screech of brakes and the rumble of delivery trucks grating against the silence she usually inhabited. Hawthorne and Bell's imposing glass tower loomed ahead, reflecting the pale sunrise like a cold, indifferent giant. She hadn't slept well. The brief, wordless encounter with Mr. Teller, the new CEO, replayed in her mind like a flickering film reel, each frame dissected and analyzed for some hidden meaning. Had she imagined the intensity in his gaze? The almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement? It was absurd, she chided herself. He was the CEO, she was a cleaner. Worlds apart. Yet, something had shifted. The weight in her stomach wasn't just from the lukewarm coffee she'd forced down. It was a premonition, a tremor of unease that resonated through her bones. Reaching the employee entrance, Janelle noticed the unusual presence of two security guards, their broad shoulders and stern expressions a stark contrast to the usual solitary figure. They stood flanking the revolving doors, their eyes scanning the incoming employees with an unnerving intensity. The air crackled with an unspoken tension. Janelle hesitated, her hand hovering over the push bar. She felt a prickle of unease, the feeling of being watched, observed, categorized. Was it because of yesterday? Was this scrutiny somehow connected to her encounter with Mr. Teller? The absurdity of the thought struck her, yet she couldn't shake the feeling of a silent, invisible thread connecting yesterday's fleeting moment to this morning's heightened security. As she stepped towards the entrance, one of the guards, a young man with a name tag that read Brian, detached himself from the wall. He moved with a surprising quietness, his boots making no sound against the polished granite floor. He stopped directly in front of her, his posture alert but not overtly aggressive. For a moment, they simply stood there, the silence stretching between them, thick and heavy. Janelle felt a familiar wave of self-consciousness wash over her, the ingrained habit of shrinking, of making herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. Years of navigating a hearing world had honed her ability to read body language, to anticipate reactions, to preemptively deflect any potential discomfort or pity. She braced herself, expecting the usual condescending smile, the slightly too loud enunciation, the patronizing pat on the shoulder. Instead, Brian simply held up his phone, the screen displaying a short message. "You're needed upstairs, executive floor. We're escorting you." The words, stark and impersonal, hung in the air like a silent explosion. Janelle stared at the message, her mind struggling to process the information. Upstairs? Executive floor? Escorted? The words echoed in the hollow spaces of her mind, bouncing off the walls of disbelief. Her usual routine was to clock in, collect her cleaning supplies, and begin her methodical route through the lower floors, her presence as unnoticed as the dust motes dancing in the shafts of early morning sunlight. This was a deviation, a sharp turn off the familiar path, and it filled her with a mixture of trepidation and a strange, fluttering curiosity. She looked up at Brian, her expression questioning, searching for some explanation in his impassive face. He offered none, only a slight gesture towards the elevators, an unspoken invitation to follow. The ride-up was a blur. Janelle stood stiffly beside Brian, the silence of the elevator amplifying the chaotic drumming of her heart against her ribs. Her mind raced, conjuring up 1,000 different scenarios, each more improbable than the last. Had there been a mistake? Was this some elaborate prank by one of the other cleaners? Or could it be related to Mr. Teller? The thought, once dismissed as absurd, now took root, growing with a strange, persistent force. What could the CEO possibly want with her? She replayed their silent encounter again and again, searching for some clue, some hidden meaning in his gaze, in the subtle tilt of his head. Had he seen something in her? Recognized something beyond the uniform, beyond the silence? The questions whirled in her mind, unanswered, unresolved. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing the plush, hushed world of the executive floor. The contrast to the bustling, utilitarian lower levels was stark. Here, the air hummed with a different energy, a silent thrum of power and privilege. The plush carpets muted the sound of their footsteps, the muted lighting casting long, mysterious shadows. Janelle felt a tightening in her chest, a sense of displacement, of being an intruder in a world she wasn't meant to inhabit. Brian led her down a long corridor, the walls lined with framed portraits of stern-faced men and women, their gazes following her as she passed. She felt a prickle of unease under their silent scrutiny, the weight of their unseen judgment pressing down on her. What were they thinking? What did they see when they looked at her? A cleaner, out of place, trespassing on their hallowed ground? The feeling of being watched intensified as they reached a set of imposing double doors. Brian paused, his hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, the silence stretched, thick with unspoken anticipation. Then, with a smooth, decisive movement, he pushed the doors open, revealing a large, elegantly appointed office. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished mahogany desk, the plush leather chairs, the intricate Persian rug. And behind the desk, standing tall and imposing, was Mr. Teller. He looked up as they entered, his gaze locking onto Janelle's. The same intensity she had glimpsed yesterday was there, magnified, focused. It held a weight, a power, that made her breath catch in her throat. The world around her seemed to fade, the muted hum of the office, the pressure of unseen eyes, all receding into a soft, distant blur. All that remained was the silence, the unspoken connection between them, a thread of something unknown, something yet to be revealed. The anxiety that had been a tight knot in her stomach now loosened, replaced by a strange, exhilarating sense of anticipation. What was about to happen? What did this man, this powerful, enigmatic figure, want with her? She stood on the threshold, poised between her familiar world and this new, unknown territory, the silence humming with the promise of change. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting a distorted image of Janelle's anxious face. The conference room, sterile and impersonal, smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaning solution, a scent she normally found comforting but now only amplified the unsettling hum in her chest. She sat stiffly in one of the plush leather chairs, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the crisp fabric of her best dress unfamiliar against her skin. It was a far cry from the worn cotton of her cleaning uniform. Last night's encounter with the CEO replayed in her mind, a silent film reel projected onto the back of her eyelids. His intense gaze, the slight furrow of his brow. Had she overstepped? Should she have just nodded like she usually did? The door opened, and the CEO, Brandon Teller, walked in, followed by a woman in a severe business suit. He looked even more imposing in the daylight, the lines of his face sharper, his presence filling the room like the scent of expensive cologne, something woodsy and subtly spiced. He offered a curt nod to the woman, who introduced herself as Ms. Evans from Human Resources. Her voice was crisp and professional, yet Janelle felt a flicker of unease. HR. That word always carried a certain weight, a potential for both good and bad news. Janelle, Mr. Teller began, his voice low and resonant. You clean here? Last night you signed to me. What? Janelle's heart hammered against her ribs. She took a deep breath, wishing she could hear it, grounding herself in the sensation of air filling her lungs. Signing back felt awkward, too informal for this sterile environment, so she typed a response on her phone, holding it up for him to read. It's how I say hello. Respect. The silence that followed stretched thin and taut. Mr. Teller's eyes, the color of glacial ice, held hers for a moment longer than comfortable. He seemed to be searching for something in her face, something beyond the words on the screen. Janelle shifted uncomfortably, the leather of the chair suddenly cold against her skin. What was he thinking? Was he angry? Did he find her gesture presumptuous? Her internal monologue spiraled, fueled by years of navigating a world that often misinterpreted her silence as ignorance or defiance. Respect, Mr. Teller finally echoed, the word hanging in the air like a question mark. He turned to Ms. Evans, a silent exchange passing between them that Janelle couldn't decipher. It heightened her anxiety. This felt like an interrogation, not a conversation. She wished Carla were here, her cousin's boisterous presence a comforting shield against the corporate chill. Janelle, Mr. Teller continued, his voice softening slightly, I witnessed something last night, something that made me realize how much we, as a company, are missing. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window overlooking the city, a sprawling concrete jungle bathed in the morning sun. We pride ourselves on being forward-thinking, innovative, but we've been blind to the talent that exists right under our noses. Janelle's confusion deepened. What was he talking about? Talent? She was just a cleaner, invisible in the background, her existence acknowledged only when something was amiss, a spill to clean, a trash can to empty. Mr. Teller turned back to her, his expression unreadable. I want to offer you something, Janelle. An opportunity. The word hung in the air, shimmering with possibilities, yet edged with a sharp sense of disbelief. An opportunity? For her? It felt surreal, like a dream she knew she would soon wake from. She stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, hope mingled with fear, excitement battling with deep-seated insecurity. He continued, explaining his vision for a new diversity initiative, a program designed to identify and nurture talent within the company, regardless of background or position. His words, though carefully chosen and corporate, held a ring of sincerity that surprised her. He spoke of inclusivity, of creating a workplace where everyone felt valued and respected. And then he said the words that changed everything. I want you to be a part of this, Janelle. I want to offer you a position as an executive assistant, starting with shadowing Kendra. The silence that descended this time was different. It wasn't the tense, uncomfortable silence of before. This was a silence pregnant with meaning, a silence that hummed with the weight of unspoken words and the potential for a future she had never dared to imagine. Janelle's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of his offer. Executive assistant? Her? It was a world away from the quiet predictability of her cleaning cart and the familiar hum of the vacuum cleaner. She glanced at Ms. Evans, who offered a small, encouraging smile. It was a genuine smile, Janelle realized, devoid of the condescending pity she had often encountered. "We believe you have the potential to excel in this role, Janelle," Ms. Evans added, her voice warm and reassuring. "We'll provide you with all the necessary training and support. We want you to succeed." A wave of emotion washed over Janelle, so intense it almost stole her breath. Gratitude, disbelief, a flicker of fear, and a burgeoning sense of hope, all swirling together in a powerful cocktail of emotions. She thought of Carla, of the late-night conversations they shared, of her cousin's unwavering belief in her. She thought of the years of silent struggle, of the invisible barriers she had faced, and the quiet determination that had kept her going. This was it, a chance to break free from the confines of her silent world, a chance to prove that she was more than just a cleaning woman. This was her chance to finally be seen. She typed a single word on her phone, her hand trembling slightly. Yes. The hum of the refrigerator was a low, constant thrum in the quiet apartment. Janelle stood at the kitchen window, the city lights blurring into a soft, shimmering tapestry against the night sky. The glass felt cool against her palm, a stark contrast to the churning warmth in her stomach. Executive assistant. The words echoed in the silence of her mind, alien and unfamiliar. Just hours ago, she'd been scrubbing the scuff marks from Mr. Teller's office floor, the familiar scent of lemon pine disinfectant clinging to her hands. Now, she was supposed to be his right hand, his gatekeeper, navigating the complex world of Hawthorne and Bell. A world she'd only glimpsed from the periphery, a world that had always seemed impenetrable. She turned away from the window, the faint tremor in her hands betraying the anxiety that gnawed at her. The small apartment, usually a haven of peace, suddenly felt constricting. Every familiar object, the worn armchair in the corner, the chipped mug on the counter, the framed photograph of her and Carla at the beach, seemed to whisper reminders of the life she'd built, a life of quiet routine and predictable solitude, a life that was about to be irrevocably altered. She ran a hand through her short, dark hair, the gesture sharp and restless. The silence amplified her thoughts, each one a tangled thread of apprehension and bewilderment. Why her? Out of all the capable, qualified individuals at Hawthorne and Bell, why had Mr. Teller chosen her, a deaf cleaning woman, to be his executive assistant? The brief, silent exchange they'd shared in his office played over and over in her mind. His intense gaze, the slight furrow of his brow, the way he'd signed thank yous slowly, deliberately, as if trying to bridge an invisible chasm. Had he seen something in her, some hidden potential she wasn't even aware of? Or was this some sort of experiment, a misguided attempt at corporate social responsibility? The thought stung, a prickle of resentment rising in her chest. She wasn't a charity case. She'd always taken pride in her work, in her ability to navigate the hearing world with quiet competence. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't sought out the spotlight. All she wanted was to do her job, earn her living, and exist in the comfortable anonymity she'd carefully cultivated. A sigh escaped her lips, a wisp of sound in the stillness. She walked over to the counter, picking up the chipped mug and filling it with water. The cool liquid against her throat was a small comfort, a momentary, grounding sensation in the swirling vortex of her thoughts. She thought of Kendra, the current executive assistant, whose gentle smile and patient explanations had offered a glimmer of hope in the bewildering maze of corporate protocols. Perhaps with Kendra's guidance, she could navigate this new terrain. Perhaps she could even excel. But then the memory of Melissa's sneering face, the barely veiled contempt in her eyes, washed over her, a chilling wave of doubt. The whispers, the stares, the palpable hostility from some of her colleagues, it was a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. She wasn't naive. She knew that her sudden promotion would ruffle feathers, that she would be seen as an outsider, an anomaly in the pristine world of Hawthorne and Bell. She just hadn't anticipated the intensity of the resentment, the undercurrent of prejudice that seemed to simmer beneath the surface of polite corporate interactions. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Carla's words from their phone call earlier that evening echoed in her mind. Janelle, this is huge. You deserve this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Carla, her ever-supportive cousin, the one person who truly understood her, who celebrated her strengths and accepted her vulnerabilities without judgment. Carla's unwavering belief in her was a lifeline, a source of strength in the face of mounting uncertainty. Setting the mug down, Janelle walked over to the small desk tucked into the corner of the living room. She opened her laptop, the soft glow of the screen illuminating her face. She needed information, needed to understand the intricacies of the role she was about to undertake. She started researching, her fingers flying across the keyboard, the silence broken only by the rhythmic tapping of keys. As she delved deeper into the world of executive assistants, a strange sense of anticipation began to blossom within her, a flicker of excitement amidst the anxiety. Perhaps this wasn't a burden, but an opportunity, a chance to prove herself, to break down barriers, to create a space for herself in a world that had often felt exclusionary. The city lights outside her window shimmered and danced, a reflection of the nascent hope that began to stir within her. The hum of the refrigerator, once a constant reminder of the mundane, now seemed to pulse with a different rhythm, a steady beat accompanying the quiet revolution taking place within her. The silence of her apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt charged with potential, the quiet before the dawn of a new chapter in her life. A chapter filled with challenges, yes, but also with the possibility of something extraordinary. The pristine white walls of Hawthorne and Bell seemed to gleam even brighter now, reflecting the fluorescent lights with a sterile, almost accusatory glare. Janelle, dressed in a crisp navy suit Kendra had helped her choose, felt the fabric cling uncomfortably, a stark contrast to the loose comfort of her old cleaning uniform. The faint scent of lemon polish, a ghost of her former life, clung stubbornly to her clothes, a bittersweet reminder of the predictable rhythm she'd traded for this unnerving quiet. Her new shoes, sensible yet stylish pumps Kendra had insisted were essential, pinched slightly, a constant, subtle throb mirroring the unease that knotted her stomach. The clicking of her heels against the polished marble floor echoed strangely, each tap a declaration of her presence in this alien landscape. Too loud, she thought, shrinking inwardly as heads turned, eyes lingering on her, assessing, judging. The initial flurry of congratulations, the awkward handshakes and strained smiles that had greeted her promotion, had quickly dissipated, leaving a chilling vacuum in its wake. Kendra, bless her kind heart, continued to be a beacon of support, patiently guiding Janelle through the labyrinthine processes of the executive suite. But even Kendra's warmth couldn't dispel the subtle chill that permeated the air. There were whispers now, hushed conversations that ceased abruptly as she approached, sideways glances that flickered away before she could meet them. The silence, once a comforting sanctuary, now felt charged with unspoken words, a constant hum of judgment that vibrated against her heightened senses. It was in the small things. The way a coffee cup was snatched away before she could reach for it, the pointedly closed doors of meeting rooms she was supposed to attend, the files placed just out of her reach, requiring her to ask, again and again, for assistance. Each interaction a pinprick, small but cumulatively piercing, deflating the fragile bubble of confidence she'd managed to cultivate. They think I don't belong here, she signed to herself, the bitter taste of truth rising in her throat. They think I'm a charity case, a token in Mr. Teller's diversity game. The thought stung, a sharp contrast to the image of Brandon Teller. She held in her mind the man who had seen her, truly seen her, amidst the anonymity of her former existence. Could she have misjudged him? Was this all a grand performance, a well-intentioned but ultimately misguided attempt to appease some unseen force? The doubt gnawed at her, feeding the growing anxiety that tightened its grip on her chest. Sleep became a shallow, restless affair, punctuated by fragmented images of disapproving faces and whispered accusations. The familiar comfort of her small apartment, once a haven, now felt stifling, the silence amplifying the turmoil within. She found herself retreating further into herself, her initial eagerness to learn and contribute slowly eroding under the relentless pressure of unspoken hostility. One afternoon, while Kendra was away from her desk, Janelle noticed an email notification pop up on Kendra's monitor. A subject line flashed, something about office humor. Curiosity, a flicker in the darkness of her growing unease, prompted her to glance at the preview. A crude joke about a deaf assistant, unable to hear instructions, followed by a string of laughing emojis. The blood drained from her face, leaving her feeling cold and hollow. The air thickened, pressing down on her chest, stealing the breath from her lungs. The words, though silent, echoed in her mind, a brutal confirmation of her deepest fears. She quickly minimized the window as Kendra returned, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. They're laughing at me, she thought, the realization a cold, hard stone in her gut. They think I'm a joke. That night, she confided in Carla, her cousin, the rapid, expressive movements of her hands painting a vivid picture of her ordeal. Carla's face, usually so bright and animated, darkened with anger, her own hands flying in response, a flurry of indignant signs. Carla told her about the online forums, the hateful comments directed at Janelle, the veiled threats and cruel mockery. Janelle had been blissfully unaware, cocooned in her silent world. But now, the veil had been lifted, revealing the ugliness that lurked beneath the surface. The weight of it all pressed down on her, a crushing burden of prejudice and resentment. The small spark of hope that had ignited within her, the belief that she could carve a place for herself in this world, flickered precariously, threatened by the rising tide of negativity. She felt a wave of despair wash over her, a chilling premonition of defeat. But somewhere, deep within the recesses of her heart, a tiny ember of defiance refused to be extinguished. A quiet determination began to take root, a nascent strength born of the ashes of her broken hope. They will not break me, she signed to herself, the movement slow, deliberate, each gesture a silent vow. I will not let them win. The silence of her apartment, once a prison, now felt like a sanctuary, a space to gather her strength, to prepare for the battles ahead. The game had changed. She was no longer just fighting for a job, but for her dignity, for her right to exist in a world that seemed determined to silence her. And she would not be silenced. The muted hum of the HVAC system was the only sound in Brandon Teller's office. Sunlight, refracted through the towering glass windows, cast geometric patterns across the polished mahogany desk. Janelle stood before it, hands clasped loosely in front of her, the smooth leather of her new portfolio clutched tight. The silence felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and the lingering echoes of the email chain that had ripped through the company like wildfire. She could practically feel the vibrations of outrage and disbelief emanating from the walls, bouncing off the expensive artwork, settling like a fine dust on her skin. Her eyes, usually bright and expressive, were downcast, studying the intricate grain of the wood, avoiding Brandon's gaze. He had called her in, his voice over the phone strained, apologetic. An apology for what exactly? For the whispers? The stares? The blatant hostility that clung to her like a second skin? She hadn't needed to see the emails to know what they said. Carla, her ever-vigilant cousin, had filled her in, her voice tight with anger over the phone, each word a sharp jab against the fragile piece Janelle had painstakingly constructed. They called her unqualified, a diversity hire, a charity case. They dissected her every move, every interaction, every silence, twisting into evidence of her inadequacy. Brandon cleared his throat, the sound breaking through the oppressive quiet. Janelle's head snapped up, her eyes finally meeting his. He looked tired. The sharp lines of his face seemed deeper, the usual confidence in his posture replaced with a subtle slump. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd seen him repeat countless times during meetings, a silent signal of his internal struggle. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice low, laced with a weariness that resonated with her own. "This place, it moves fast." He paused, as if searching for the right words, the right way to navigate the minefield of emotions that lay between them. "It can bear resistant to change." Janelle's mind raced. Resistant to change. Was that what this was about? Change? Or was it about her? About the sudden, inexplicable shift in her life? The unexpected promotion from cleaning woman to executive assistant? She had spent years blending into the background, a silent shadow in the periphery of this world of power and privilege. Now, she was thrust into the spotlight, a symbol, a representative of something she hadn't even asked for. The weight of it pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. "You've shown potential," Brandon continued, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual firmness. "More potential than most people around here realize." He leaned forward, his gaze intense, searching. "Your attention to detail, your perception. It's remarkable." Janelle's fingers tightened around the strap of her portfolio. Perception. Was he referring to the incident with the misplaced files, the almost invisible discrepancy she had noticed while cleaning his office? The silent gesture, the repositioning of the folder that had somehow caught his attention, leading to this upheaval? She hadn't meant to be noticed. She hadn't meant to disrupt anything. She had simply been doing her job, the job she had held for years, the job that allowed her to exist in this space without truly being a part of it. A wave of anxiety washed over her, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. The silence stretched between them again, heavy with unspoken questions and doubts. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to voice the fear that had been gnawing at her since the day she accepted the promotion. "Did I take someone's job?" She signed, her hands precise, the movements sharp against the stillness of the room. Her voice, though silent, echoed in the vast space, each gesture a tangible representation of the vulnerability she felt. Brandon's expression softened, the lines around his eyes deepening with a mixture of understanding and something else, something that looked almost like guilt. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him, the sound amplified in the quiet. He seemed to be weighing his words, carefully considering their impact. Janelle held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. He finally spoke, his voice low and measured. Melissa chose to leave. She was offered a position at another firm, a significant step up. He paused, his gaze meeting hers directly. "This isn't about charity, Janelle. It's about recognizing talent, regardless of background." Janelle's mind raced. He said it wasn't charity, but was it truly about talent? Or was it about something else entirely? Was it about guilt? About atonement for the systemic inequalities that permeated the very foundation of this company? Was she a pawn in some larger game, a symbol of diversity in a world that desperately needed to appear inclusive? The questions swirled in her mind, a chaotic storm of doubt and uncertainty. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But the whispers, the stares, the emails were a constant reminder of the invisible barriers that still stood between her and true acceptance. The silence settled again, thick and heavy, pregnant with unspoken truths. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the room, obscuring the details, blurring the lines between reality and perception. Janelle stood there, caught in the crosshairs of change, a silent warrior in a battle she hadn't chosen to fight. The soft hum of the computer, the muted click of the keyboard, the faint rustle of paper, these were the new sounds of Janelle's world. Her new office, once a symbol of unattainable success, was now her everyday reality. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the dimly lit corners she was used to cleaning. The plush carpet beneath her feet felt alien, a far cry from the cold, hard tiles of the hallways. It had been weeks since her unexpected promotion, weeks filled with a mixture of quiet triumph and gnawing anxiety. Every morning, a flicker of disbelief still ran through her. "Underscore me," an executive assistant. Underscore the thought felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Kendra, ever patient, had become her guide through this unfamiliar territory. She patiently explained the intricacies of scheduling, the nuances of corporate communication, the unspoken rules of this world. Janelle watched, absorbed, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Her deafness, once a barrier, was now a peculiar advantage. It allowed her to focus intensely, to observe the subtleties of body language, the unspoken tensions that rippled through the office. One such observation saved Mr. Teller from a double-booked meeting, a scheduling conflict so subtle it had slipped past Kendra. When Janelle pointed it out, using a combination of sign language and typed notes, Kendra's surprise quickly morphed into respect. Underscore, she's remarkable, underscore, Kendra thought, a seed of genuine admiration taking root. But not everyone shared Kendra's sentiment. The whispers, the stares, the barely concealed sneers, Janelle felt them like a physical weight. She understood. This was their territory, and she, the cleaning lady, had somehow breached their walls. Her competence, instead of easing their apprehension, only seemed to fuel their resentment. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Underscore, how could she, a deaf woman who used to clean their toilets, now sit in an office, privy to their secrets, a part of their world? Underscore, the hostility reached its peak in the form of Melissa, the former executive assistant. Janelle had seen her lurking in the hallways, her face a mask of barely suppressed fury. Today, the mask slipped. Melissa stood in the doorway of Janelle's office, her eyes blazing. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. "You're in my seat," Melissa hissed, her voice laced with venom. The words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Janelle felt a wave of coldness wash over her. She had expected this confrontation, dreaded it, yet now that it was here, a strange calm settled over her. She met Melissa's gaze, her own expression unreadable. Underscore, my seat, underscore, she signed slowly, deliberately, underscore, earned, not given, underscore. She then typed a quick message on her laptop and turned the screen to face Melissa. "I was promoted. Mr. Teller chose me." Melissa's face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "He chose you? You? Eh?" she stammered, unable to articulate the slur she clearly wanted to utter. Janelle watched her, a flicker of something akin to pity in her eyes. Underscore, she's clinging to a world that no longer exists, underscore, she thought. Underscore, a world where people like me are invisible, unheard, underscore. The incident with Melissa marked a turning point. The whispers escalated into open hostility, the stares into glares. Small, insignificant items started disappearing from her desk. Files were misplaced, emails deleted. Janelle knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was more than just resentment. This was a deliberate campaign to undermine her, to force her out. The anxiety that had been simmering beneath the surface now threatened to consume her. Sleep became a luxury, her nights filled with a restless unease. The once comforting silence of her apartment now echoed with the unspoken accusations of her colleagues. Underscore, they're trying to break me, underscore, she realized, a knot of fear tightening in her chest. Carla, her cousin, noticed the change. Over a shared meal, she saw the shadows under Janelle's eyes, the tightness in her jaw. "What's wrong?" she signed, her concern evident. Janelle hesitated. She didn't want to burden Carla, but the weight of it all was becoming too much to bear. She recounted the incidents, the hostility, the subtle sabotage. As she signed, the words tumbling out in a rush, a sense of relief washed over her. Carla listened intently, her expression hardening with each new revelation. "They're going after you online, too," Carla signed, her face grim. "Nasty things. Accusing you off sleeping your way to the top." Janelle felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The online harassment was a new low, a violation that cut deeper than the office whispers. Underscore, they're trying to destroy my reputation, underscore, she thought, a cold dread spreading through her. Underscore, they're trying to take away everything I've worked for, underscore. The fight that had been slowly building within her now ignited into a fierce blaze. I won't let them underscore. She vowed silently, her eyes hardening with resolve. I won't let them silence me, undersir. The quiet, reserved cleaning lady was gone. In her place stood a woman of steel, ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. The mahogany door of Brandon Teller's office felt heavy, resistant under Janelle's hand. Each polished panel reflected her image back, a woman small in stature, swallowed by the oversized blazer Kendra had insisted she borrow, her usually neat bun slightly askew. The faint, metallic tang of fear coated her tongue. She'd learned to read lips well, but the hushed whispers, the sideways glances, the sudden silences that followed her down the hallway spoke a language clearer than any words. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The air within the office was thick with tension. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a subdued, almost funereal light. Brandon Teller, his face etched with a grim determination she'd never seen before, sat behind his expansive desk. Two men from the IT department hovered near the sleek, modern computer terminal Janelle had been using. One, younger, nervously adjusted his glasses. The other, older, his face impassive, typed rapidly on a keyboard. Across the room, Melissa, her arms crossed tight against her chest, watched Janelle with a chillingly familiar look of smug satisfaction. It was the same look she'd worn when she'd accidentally spilled coffee on Janelle's carefully organized files. The same look she'd worn when she'd forgotten to tell Janelle about the rescheduled meeting. Janelle's stomach clenched. She knew that look. It was the look of a predator closing in on its prey. Janelle, Brandon's voice, usually warm and encouraging, was clipped, devoid of its usual cordiality. We have a problem. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A problem. What kind of problem? She'd been meticulous, painstakingly careful with every task, every email, every file. She triple-checked everything, terrified of making a mistake, of proving those who whispered behind their hands right. What could she have possibly done wrong? The older IT guy cleared his throat. We traced it. It came from this terminal. He gestured towards the computer where Janelle had been working just an hour ago, a cold dread seeping in her bones. A confidential client file, meant for a specific vendor, had been sent to a competitor. A catastrophic mistake, one that could cost the company millions. Janelle's mind raced. This was impossible. She hadn't sent any files to any external parties. She hadn't even touched any client files today. Her work this morning had been routine, scheduling meetings, drafting emails, organizing Brandon's calendar. She met Brandon's gaze, her eyes wide with a silent plea. He looked away, the furrow in his brow deepening. The knot in her stomach tightened. Had he already judged her? Had he believed the whispers, the accusations that she wasn't capable, that she didn't belong? Find out who logged in, Brandon instructed, his voice strained. A wave of nausea washed over Janelle. Her login, her password, it was all she had. It was the key to her new life, a life she'd never dared to dream of. A life she was now watching crumble before her eyes. She looked at Kendra, hoping for a flicker of support, of understanding, but Kendra's gaze was fixed on the floor. The younger IT guy began to speak, his voice hesitant. The logs TVE been wiped. A murmur rippled through the room. Wiped? How is that even possible? Janelle's mind whirled, grasping for an explanation. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was deliberate. Someone had framed her. Her eyes flicked to Melissa, who was now openly smirking, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. It clicked. The late nights Melissa had been putting in, the way she'd lingered near Janelle's desk, her feigned offers of help, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. Panic seized her. How could she prove her innocence? How could she fight back when the very tools she needed to defend herself had been weaponized against her? She felt a cold, suffocating sense of isolation. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the plush carpet beneath her feet feeling like shifting sand. Brandon's voice cut through the haze of her fear. This is a serious security breach. We need to understand what happened. His gaze, sharp and assessing, landed on Janelle. I need you to stay here, Janelle. We need to talk. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation. Stay here, like a criminal, a suspect. The injustice of it burned in her throat, a bitter, acrid taste. She wanted to scream, to rail against the unfairness of it all, but the words caught in her throat, choked by the fear that constricted her chest. The IT guys left, leaving a palpable silence in their wake. Melissa lingered, her eyes fixed on Janelle, a predatory satisfaction in her gaze. Janelle met her stare, her own eyes blazing with a silent fury. She might be deaf, she might be vulnerable, but she wasn't broken. She wouldn't be silenced. She would fight. Brandon turned to Melissa. Melissa, I understand you've been helping Janelle acclimate to her new role. His voice was carefully neutral, but there was a subtle shift in his tone, a hint of suspicion she hadn't heard before. Melissa's smile faltered slightly. Yes, of course, Brandon. I've been doing everything I can. I appreciate that, Brandon replied, his eyes still fixed on Melissa. Perhaps you could shed some light on this situation. The subtle shift in the power dynamic, the almost imperceptible crack in Melissa's facade, gave Janelle a flicker of hope. It was a small thing, a tiny ember in the darkness, but it was enough to keep the fear at bay. She watched, her breath held tight in her chest. As the interrogation unfolded, the unspoken accusations hanging heavy in the air. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was far from over. The silence of her office, once a sanctuary, now felt heavy, oppressive. Janelle traced the smooth surface of her new desk, the rich wood a stark contrast to the worn laminate of the cleaning closet. The faint scent of lemon polish still clung to her, a ghostly reminder of a life she no longer inhabited. A life where invisibility was a shield, not a burden. Now, every eye in Hawthorne and Bell seemed to land on her, weighing her down with a mixture of curiosity, resentment, and something akin to fear. She'd expected challenges, anticipated the subtle slights and the whispered gossip, but the sheer weight of it all threatened to suffocate her. The online harassment, revealed by Carla, had been particularly brutal. Anonymous voices twisted her story, painting her as a manipulative opportunist, a diversity hire who hadn't earned her place. Each hateful comment was a pinprick, deflating her hard-won confidence. The rhythmic tapping of Kendra's heels broke through Janelle's thoughts. She looked up to see her mentor, a soft smile gracing her lips. Kendra had been a steady presence throughout the tumultuous weeks since Janelle's promotion, a beacon of normalcy in a sea of shifting tides. Big day, Kendra signed, her movements precise and clear. Mr. Teller's email is going out company-wide in a few minutes. Janelle nodded, her stomach clenching. Brandon's email, a public acknowledgement of the data breach, of Melissa's sabotage, and of her own unexpected role in uncovering the truth. Part of her craved vindication, a public clearing of her name. But a larger part felt a deep-seated unease. She'd never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be the center of attention. This sudden thrust into the public eye, even under positive circumstances, felt like a violation. It's good, Janelle, Kendra continued, sensing her apprehension. This is a step forward, not just for you, but for everyone here. Janelle forced a smile, a small upward curve of her lips. Kendra's optimism was infectious, a comforting balm against the gnawing anxiety. She knew Kendra was right. Logically, this email was a turning point, a chance for Hawthorne and Bell to finally confront its deeply ingrained prejudices. But the fear, the ingrained instinct to shrink back into the shadows, remained. It clung to her like the phantom scent of lemon polish. The chime of an incoming email echoed throughout the office, a collective intake of breath accompanying its arrival. Janelle watched as faces illuminated by the glow of computer screens, expressions shifting from anticipation to surprise to something akin to shame. Brandon's words were sharp, precise, cutting through the carefully constructed facade of corporate politeness. He didn't shy away from the ugliness of the situation, the blatant discrimination Janelle had faced. He named Melissa's actions, not as a simple mistake, but as a deliberate attempt to sabotage a colleague based on prejudice. He spoke of accountability, of a need for a fundamental shift in company culture. He announced Melissa's termination, not as a punishment, but as a necessary consequence of her actions. And then, his words shifted, focusing on the future. He outlined the new inclusivity training program, the creation of a dedicated diversity and inclusion committee, and the implementation of new reporting procedures for harassment and discrimination. Janelle read the email twice, 3 times, each word sinking in slowly. She felt a strange disconnect, as if the events he described had happened to someone else in some other lifetime. The online harassment, the malicious gossip, the constant feeling of being watched, judged, and found wanting. It was all there, laid bare for everyone to see. A soft hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present. Kendra was signing again, her expression earnest. "He means it, Janelle. Things are going to change." Janelle met her gaze, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Could things really change? Could a single email, a single act of accountability, truly dismantle years of ingrained prejudice? A part of her, the cynical, cautious part, remained skeptical. But another part, a part she hadn't realized existed until now, dared to believe. The following days were a blur of meetings, training sessions, and hushed conversations in hallways. The atmosphere at Hawthorne and Bell was palpably different. The blatant hostility had dissipated, replaced by a tentative curiosity, a cautious optimism. People who had once avoided her gaze now offered hesitant smiles, awkward nods of acknowledgement. The inclusivity training was particularly impactful. Facilitated by an outside consultant, it forced employees to confront their own biases, to acknowledge the subtle ways in which prejudice manifested in their daily interactions. It wasn't a quick fix, a magic bullet to erase years of ingrained behavior, but it was a start, a painful, necessary start. One afternoon, as Janelle was leaving the office, a young woman from the accounting department approached her. She'd been one of the most vocal critics online, her comments particularly vicious. Janelle braced herself for another confrontation, another barrage of hateful words. But instead, the woman simply stood there, her face flushed with shame. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. Well, I said it was awful. I'm truly sorry." Janelle stared at her for a long moment, her initial surprise slowly giving way to a cautious understanding. She signed back, her movements slow and deliberate. "Thank you for apologizing." The woman's eyes welled up with tears. She nodded, a small, shaky gesture, and then hurried away. Janelle watched her go, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. Sadness for the pain that had been inflicted, hope for the possibility of redemption, and a quiet, burgeoning sense of empowerment. The silence of her office, once a symbol of her isolation, now felt different. It was still quiet, still a sanctuary, but now it also held the promise of something more. The promise of a future where her voice, even in its silence, could be heard. The hum of the office was a familiar lullaby now, a low, constant thrum that vibrated through the floor and up into Janelle's desk, a subtle percussion against the palms of her hands as she typed. Months had passed, a blur of new routines and evolving relationships. The initial awkwardness, the stares that had felt like physical pricks against her skin, had faded, replaced by something resembling acceptance. Not quite warmth, not yet camaraderie, but a quiet acknowledgement of her presence, of her competence. It was a fragile piece, easily shattered, she knew. Still, it was enough. Enough to let a small, hesitant bud of something like contentment bloom in the quiet corners of her heart. The muted click of the door, opening, barely registered at first. Janelle's focus was absorbed in the spreadsheet on her screen, a complex web of figures that spoke a language she'd learned to decipher with surprising ease. Numbers didn't lie, didn't judge. They offered a stark clarity she'd always appreciated, a welcome contrast to the messy, unpredictable world of human interaction. A shadow fell across her desk, and she looked up, her fingers automatically signing a polite greeting before her conscious mind fully processed the figure standing there. A young woman, barely out of college, judging by the nervous fidgeting and the wide, uncertain eyes. An intern, most likely. The girl clutched a folder to her chest like a shield. Janelle waited, her expression carefully neutral, her internal monologue a whirlwind of speculation. Was there a problem? Had she made a mistake? The anxiety, a phantom limb of her past insecurities, twitched beneath the surface of her calm exterior. The intern opened her mouth, closed it again, swallowed. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Janelle resisted the urge to fill it, to preemptively apologize for some unknown transgression. Instead, she held the girl's gaze, a silent invitation to speak. Finally, in a rush of breathy words, the intern blurted, "You're the one who her voice trailed off, her eyes flicking towards the framed photograph on the wall behind Janelle. Janelle followed her gaze. The photo, slightly askew, captured her on her first day as Brandon Teller's executive assistant. Her hands hovered awkwardly in front of her, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. Brandon, standing beside her, radiated an almost paternal warmth, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. It was a staged photo, a deliberate message from the CEO, a public declaration of support for the company's new diversity initiative. At the time, Janelle had felt like a specimen under a microscope, her every move scrutinized, every gesture dissected. Now, looking at the photo, she felt a flicker of something akin to pride, not for the position itself, but for the change it represented. The intern's voice, small and awestruck, pulled her back to the present. "You're the one who taught Mr. Teller sign language." Janelle's lips curved into a slight smile. It wasn't entirely true. Brandon had taken the initiative to learn, driven by a sense of fairness, a desire to truly connect with all of his employees. She had merely been a willing participant, a guide in a world he'd never known. "I'm just me," she signed, her fingers moving with a graceful precision that belied the complex emotions swirling within. The intern's eyes widened, a spark of understanding igniting in their depths. It's amazing," she stammered, her gaze flitting back to the photo. "What you've done." Janelle's internal monologue wrestled with the weight of those words. What'd she done? Had she really done anything? She hadn't sought the spotlight, hadn't asked for this attention. She'd simply wanted to do her job, to be treated with respect, to exist without being constantly reminded of her difference. Yet, somehow, her quiet existence had become a symbol, a catalyst for change. The weight of that realization, the unexpected burden of being a pioneer, settled heavily on her shoulders. A gentle knock on the door broke the spell. Kendra, her former mentor and now a close friend, poked her head in, a warm smile gracing her features. "Janelle, Brandon needs you in the conference room. And bring the quarterly reports." Janelle nodded, a quiet affirmation. As she gathered the reports, her gaze lingered on the framed photograph one last time. The image of her past self, hesitant and uncertain, stared back at her. The journey had been fraught with challenges, with moments of doubt and despair. But in the quiet hum of the office, in the respectful gaze of the intern, in the supportive smile of Kendra, she saw the tangible evidence of her impact. The change wasn't sweeping, not yet revolutionary, but it was real, and it was happening. The small bud of contentment within her unfurled a little more, its fragile petals reaching towards the warmth of a new dawn. The office, once a place of quiet isolation, was slowly transforming into something else entirely, something that felt almost like belonging. The hum of the computer was a low, steady thrum against the quiet of her office. Janelle's fingers danced across the keyboard, a silent symphony of efficiency. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, cast stripes across the polished mahogany desk, a stark contrast to the worn, laminate surfaces she'd known for so long. It was a different kind of quiet here, not the hushed, expectant stillness of the empty office building after hours, but a vibrant, daytime hush, punctuated by the muffled ring of distant phones and the low murmur of conversations beyond her closed door. Her office. Executive assistant to the CEO. The words still felt strange, almost alien on her tongue, a silent echo in the landscape of her mind. She paused, her hands hovering over the keys, and glanced around the room. It was a space she'd meticulously curated, stripping away the impersonal corporate decor and replacing it with items that resonated with her. A small, vibrant painting by a deaf artist hung on the wall, a burst of color against the neutral backdrop. A smooth, gray stone sat on her desk, a tactile reminder of the grounding silence she often sought. These small touches, these pieces of herself, anchored her in this new reality, a reality she had never dared to imagine. The journey here had been unexpected, a chance encounter, a silent exchange, a ripple effect that had changed the course of her life. The memory of that night, the vast emptiness of the building, the sudden appearance of Brandon Teller, the new CEO, still felt surreal. She had been so focused on her task, so immersed in the familiar rhythm of her work, that his presence had startled her. The way he'd watched her, not with pity or condescension, but with a quiet curiosity, had unsettled her. Then, the gesture, the simple, respectful inclination of his head, acknowledging her existence, her work, her silence. It had been a small thing, a fleeting moment, but it had held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. That gesture, so small yet so profound, had been the catalyst. It had sparked a change, not just in her life, but in the very fabric of Hawthorne and Bell. The diversity, initiative, the sign language classes, the shift in company culture, it all stemmed from that single, silent interaction. The irony wasn't lost on her. A world of sound and fury, shifted by silence. The memory of the initial hostility, the whispers and stares, the blatant attempts to undermine her, still stung. Melissa's malicious sabotage, the data breach, the fear and uncertainty that had gnawed at her had been a trial by fire. But from the ashes of that ordeal, a new strength had emerged. She had found her voice, not in spoken words, but in the unwavering clarity of her actions, in the quiet power of her resilience. Kendra's support, Carla's fierce protectiveness, Brandon's unwavering belief in her, these were the threads that had woven a safety net around her, catching her when she faltered, empowering her to rise. The online harassment, the vitriol spewed from anonymous corners of the internet, had been a different kind of battle. Carla, her ever-vigilant cousin, had brought it to her attention, her voice tight with anger and concern. Janelle had felt a wave of nausea, a chilling sense of violation. To be targeted, not for what she had done, but for who she was, for the silence that defined her, was a cruelty she hadn't anticipated. But even in the face of that ugliness, she had refused to be silenced. She had chosen visibility, choosing to stand tall, a beacon in the darkness, a testament to the power of resilience. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, the scent of lavender from the small diffuser on her desk filling her lungs. The journey had been arduous, fraught with challenges and uncertainties. But it had also been a journey of self-discovery, a journey of empowerment. She had learned to navigate the treacherous currents of corporate politics, to decipher the unspoken language of power dynamics, to wield her silence as both a shield and a weapon. She had learned to trust her instincts, to embrace her strengths, to find her voice in a world that often tried to drown it out. The silence of her office was no longer the silence of invisibility, of being overlooked and unheard. It was the silence of strength, of self-possession, of knowing her worth. It was the silence of a woman who had found her place, not in the margins, but at the center of her own narrative. Opening her eyes, she returned her focus to the computer screen. The work awaited, the challenges remained, but now she faced them not with trepidation, but with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew she could overcome. The hum of the computer, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, the quiet of her office, these were no longer symbols of isolation, but of her hard-won peace. And in that peace, she found the strength to continue, to inspire, to be the change she wanted to see in the world.